Hello, everyone. Welcome to Human Stories. My name is Olga Ulturgasheva. I am a senior lecturer in social anthropology at the University of Manchester in United Kingdom. Today, I shall speak about a research project in which I have been recently involved in a capacity of a researcher and a project director. The project Community Adaptations and Knowledge Sharing in Alaska and Siberia, funded by the US National Science Foundation, has been an attempt to create a collaborative space for sharing of environmental expertise and strategies of adaptation to the latest dynamic of climate change between two indigenous communities of Alaskan Yupik and Siberian Eveny. One of the project's goals is to identify the potential of Arctic indigenous collaboration to decolonize research methodologies that tend to reproduce existing structures of exclusion, preventing much needed voices from participating at the center of knowledge production. Therefore, the study is not only about sharing knowledge, it is also about a decolonizing effort, that is to say, attuning to or recalibrating the process of knowledge co-production in accordance with indigenous ways of learning and acquiring knowledge that tend to be dismissed and intentionally erased in dominant epistemologies. The latest environmental changes in Alaska and Siberia are feedbacks to the environmental destruction caused by the cascading dynamic of simultaneously occurring events, such as intensive wildfires, degradation of permafrost, acidification of ocean waters, and rapacious industrial extraction of mineral resources, which dramatically impact safety of non-human and human worlds. The intensity of the current environmental pressures is making visible and pertinent how important it is to challenge the reproduction of what are, in effect, neo-colonial academic practices, and to highlight the need to destabilize this hegemonic state of affairs. Although our study emphasizes the importance of listening to indigenous voices, I hasten to add that the aim of this project is neither about siloing nor exoticizing indigenous knowledge as something apart. Instead, the study seeks to provide a complex account of thinking about the knowledge production that includes multiple perspectives, with local voices at the core and not in the periphery of the discussion. In the face of the systemic and environmental challenges, Siberian Eveny and Alaskan Yupik came together to share their experiences and expertise centered on adaptation and survival. This is the kind of expertise which relies on symmetric fusion of human and non-human and recognizes sentient qualities of the environment that is defined and conditions by non-human worlds. In the context where survival very much depends on understanding of interconnectivity and human reliance on plants, animals, trees, geological features of the earth, and relations with animals and ancestor spirit world, the power to notice minute details, the ability to decide what they mean and share your observations with others have become the core matters for knowledge exchange between Yupik and Eveny. Given the emphasis on personal discovery and experiential ways of knowledge acquisition made by Eveny and Yupik, we, the project leaders, were specifically concerned about the methods of knowledge elicitation and ethical access to environmental expertise. How do we engage indigenous communities in a research process that is equally meaningful for communities and scientifically insightful? How do we organize the process of co-production of knowledge without imposing, yet again, academic knowledge hierarchies and without inscribing an ever-present power imbalance between scientific expertise and indigenous knowledge? By what procedures and partnership arrangements can climate change action transform into a collaborative effort that fully involves diverse communities? How would such passages enhance our collective understanding of climate change impacts and options for adaptation? These are the questions we posited at the beginning of the project. Understanding how knowledge flows and is being transmitted among Eveny and Yupik has been fundamental for organizing research process. After a year-long consultation with members, leaders, and elders of Eveny and Yupik communities, Stacey Rasmus, an Alaskan PI, and myself concurred that it is crucial to discuss our joint research activities during a workshop where Yupik and Eveny could launch an intergroup exchange of knowledge. Therefore, now I would like to provide an account of how the workshop participants were involved in the exchange during one of the workshops, and what methods of engagement we utilized in order to make the event meaningful and insightful for Yupik and Eveny in the first instance. First, I have to say that the exchange of knowledge required quite a good measure of flexibility from our ends of PRs, as the process has turned out to be a complex co-learning experiment. The modes through which the knowledge is given and received involved multiple adjustments to the interactive flow and complex content of the knowledge shared by two groups. And to a certain extent, this exercise of sharing of environmental knowledge has offered a rare opportunity to observe what repertoire of resources, means, and strategies Eveny and Yupik participants were drawing from. What we also observed is that the opportunity of knowledge sharing arises when one listens intently to others' ideas, and that one does not insist that his or her idea must prevail. Moreover, unlike anthropologists who train to look for difference, our workshop participants have been often driven by the search for affinity, similarity, and even kinship. At one point during the introductory discussion, a Yupik elder told Siberian Eveny that in the distant past, when there wasn't a state border between Alaska and Siberia, the Alaskan community of Hooper Bay inspired Siberian male visitors to cross Bering Strait. Siberian men attracted by beauty of Yupik women would endure long trips across the strait in a search for their marriage partners. This spontaneous search for affinity continued when both Yupik and Eveny would casually tell each other how a so-and-so member of Eveny or Yupik group would remind them one of their cousins, relatives, or elders back in Alaska and Siberia. Such an expected collective quest for affinity has set the tone for the intergroup dialogue. In challenging environments of Northwest Siberia and Southwest Alaska, Eveny and Yupik have to quickly learn how to observe, watch for subtle clues, to anticipate changes, and to acquire skills associated with dwelling in minimal ecosystems and freezing temperatures. For Eveny and Yupik, personal experience has provided one set of clues. However, it has always been the stories that always remain to be educational and informative. Hence, we have collectively decided to model the exchange around the Eveny and Yupik practices and ideologies of sharing, specifically a necessity to share information for the sake of survival. For example, among Eveny, each reindeer herder has a responsibility to convey the information accurately to ensure others survive, as false or mistaken information may jeopardize people's lives. This responsibility creates a strong connection between those with information and those who seek it. Nevertheless, individuals are expected to gain information from several sources and are left to draw their own conclusions. Eveny also identified two genres of storytelling, which exemplify two ways of learning and conveying the information. One is called telling, the stories that instruct how to survive. The telling type of story usually starts with a person lacking knowledge. Usually, it is a story about a person who doesn't know what to do in a situation of crisis. So she or he seeks advice from an ancestor spirit or animal spirit who instructs what a person should do to resolve the crisis. Here the person is expected to replicate exactly what he has seen and heard from the knowledgeable source. Teleng are the source of knowledge that one has to follow in order to survive. Another type of the story is Uchenek. These are the stories of personal experience told either by the person who has lived that experience or by a person who should in the first instance identify whose experience it was. That is to say, acknowledge a person who was the original narrator of the story and the source of knowledge. In the case when it is not the personal testimony of the storyteller, the stories are best told by two people, so they can verify each other's accounts. One has to tell the story, and another has to validate it. I think the exercise of anthropological writing is comparable to Uchenek. This has to be a story about your personal lived experience. But if you are drawing from a story of a different person, you must be accurate in reproducing the story and then acknowledge the author of the original story. In Eveny view, when you are listening and learning a new information, you are encompassing not only knowledge, but relationships. You acknowledge the relationship between yourself and the person who told you that story. The ethical dimension of Uchenek stories has been appreciated by Ubik, as they viewed it as the essential element for sharing their stories. Both counterparts agreed to follow these ethical standards unanimously. Since sharing has been an important organizing concept for the workshop, we organized the exchange around three practices of sharing: sharing of stories, sharing of food, sharing the experience of one subsistence activity. We chose berry picking, and C, sharing and exchange of gifts. Participation in sharing rituals facilitated the participants' multisensorial engagement through taste, smell, eating, dancing, audio and visual perceptions, and general sense of conviviality and commensality. A berry picking trip and an event of native food sharing has been successful in engendering a sense of solidarity among workshop participants, crucial for the implementation of further research tasks. The first 2 days were devoted to photo and video presentations of the community past and present. Since we engaged youth, adults, and elders, they provided multi-generational takes on their communities' histories and contemporary situations. For sharing stories in observation session, we specifically planned the activities in such a way that would encourage each participant to express their opinions without being intimidated by a setting of the university seminar room or a conference hall. For example, a young Eveny reindeer herder, Anton, was very quiet during the discussions held in a seminar room, but he became vocal and opinionated when the Eveny UP group all went to a veterinary laboratory of the University of Alaska-Fairbanks. He was distraught by a view of the reindeer inside the experimental veterinary facility, where reindeer were put behind the barbed wire and looked malnourished and weak. He viewed the scientific facility as a prison for reindeer and was alarmed by the negligent ways the reindeer were kept in the lab. At that moment, he demonstrated how rich his knowledge of reindeer is, but moreover, the way he was disturbed has manifested how the laboratory context of human-reindeer interaction, where reindeer holds the position of an inferior object for a veterinary experiment, profoundly contradicted Eveny's symmetric view of human-reindeer relations to which Anton was accustomed. Moreover, people less prominent in speaking inside the classroom became more prominent in other contexts, where they had a chance to express themselves through dance and singing. Ubik and Eveny switched from speaking to dancing pretty soon. It turned out for both groups that dance is a story of personal encounter, an aesthetically pleasing form of knowledge transmission. The dancing centered on contemporary subsistence practices and human-animal relations. This particular session represented a sequence of artistic performances where people narrated and enacted their stories about animals. Eveny and Yupik narrated, sang, and danced stories about reindeer and caribou, bears, birds, lynx, and wolves. Each story was informing not only on human-animal relations. Each story was an account of survival skills, techniques of adaptation to a challenging and rapidly changing environment, and climate history of both regions. The animal stories proved to be one of the eloquent expressions of community concerns over the latest environmental and socioeconomic challenges. The Yupik performed dances depicting situations involving risk of drowning and being lost among ice drifts of the Arctic Ocean, and risky encounters of predators, polar bears, and wolves. Eveny performed their traditional reindeer dances and sang the songs about life-threatening episodes of almost falling off a cliff or drowning in the rapid currents of the mountain rivers. The dances and songs transmitted a strong message that sharing information is key, as is watching the animal behavior closely, who can often sense a risky encounter or dangerous event before humans can. The performers emphasized the importance of teaching the young people how to react calmly to risky situations, even if they feel panicked inside. So what sort of lessons can we take from this exchange? The question that I pursued in this discussion is what needs to be done to create conditions for a fruitful dialogue among diverse stakeholders, whether it is an indigenous knowledge holder, a scientist, or a state agent. The exchange shows that the fruitful dialogue could be built on the symmetric exchange of knowledge and genuine desire of the groups to learn from each other. The horizontal mode of exchange provides a productive context for elicitation of local observations of environmental change. When participants understand that there is no place for superiority of one's type of knowledge, and when neither of the expertise prevails or dominates over others, there is a chance and space for collaborative knowledge production. For example, when Eveny talked about human-reindeer relations and social importance of reindeer herding for the health of the community, Yupik never looked down or dismissed them. Instead, they validated and supported Eveny by providing their own accounts of centrality of the seal for the well-being of Yupik. In other words, the exchange created the context when common ground, where all involved parties have been mindful of the many social, cultural, and historical factors that shaped attitudes, motivations, and actions of the collaborators. It is the commitment of both communities to work towards mutually embraced ends that enabled the dialogue and recognition of shared intellectual returns between equally invested knowledge producers. Thank you very much for your attention. Please check out the blog post for more human stories and subscribe.
Peace and light to you and yours. So I sometimes